next icebreaker is going to be Mr. Steve Puchatek.
Very good. I'm going to tell you already, I'm going to go over, just so you know. All right. Wow. That's the first one, right? All right, so tonight I'm doing my icebreaker speech about my favorite topic, which is me. I'm just kidding, it's really not me. I do enjoy talking about the four things that kind of drive the purpose of my life, and that would be the importance, or the passion of, the power of passion, the importance of conviction, the need for faith, and the gift of giving back. So back in 1993, my brother had died of AIDS. He was 30. And at the time, the landscape of HIV looked very different than it does today. So I eventually found myself at a healing weekend that was sponsored by the United Methodist Church. And it's about 125 people who come together for the weekend and talk about their hopes, dreams, and expectations of the future. And at that first weekend, I was sitting in the back of the room, a bit fearful and a little bit curious. And as the weekend evolved, I realized I wanted to be in front of the room eventually and guide the way that I was being guided. So fast forward to 1999, I lost my job, I'd been fired, my car had been repossessed, I sound like a bad country song. I was on probation and living in some guy's basement. And I was at the weekend in May, and I was kind of having a tough time there. So I was in the meditation room, and I stumbled upon Chicken Soup for the Soul. Are you all familiar with those books? Yeah. Pretty great books. This was in 1999. So I read a couple of stories, and I put the book down. And as it turns out, I had to remove myself from that weekend. And a friend of mine took me home. And I walked across the street to the grocery store. And as the doors opened, there literally was a huge display of Chicken Soup books. Well, I don't believe in coincidence, so I bought one. And I took it home, and I read it from cover to cover. And then I read the next one, and the next one, and the next one, until I was telling the stories like they were my own. That's true. So, long about August, I was taking the bus to work, 4 hours, 3 buses, 1 job. And I thought to myself, why isn't there a book of our stories? Or why wasn't there? And so that's when the Seasons of Hope was born. So the summer turned into fall, and by then I had an apartment, I got my car back, I had 3 jobs. I was working at Macy's, Huntington Bank, and the Ohio State University Medical Center. And one night in October, it was about 11 o'clock, and I was in the elevator with someone else, and I was holding my Chicken Soup book, and she said, "What's that?" And I was so tired, and she said, "Oh, are those books any good?" And I said, "Changed my life." And she said, "Maybe I should get myself one of those." So I looked at her, and I looked at the book, and I looked back at her. You can hear the music going. And I said, "Take mine, read it, and then pass it on." And as we walked out of the building that night, she to her left, she to the right, me to my left, we simultaneously turned around and looked at each other with that smile. And as I turned back around, I didn't know exactly what had happened in that moment, but I knew that I needed to give 125 of those Chicken Soup books to the weekend. So I got home, I called this woman April, who was in charge of the weekend at the time, and I said, "April, I'm going to give away 125 books at the weekend in 5 weeks." And she said, "Chicken." She called me Chicken by this point. She said, "You've got 3 jobs, and I'm dropping groceries off on your back porch. You are not giving away 125 books." And I said, "Don't you know who I am? I'm giving away 125 books." So I wrote a letter to the Chicken Soup for the Soul people. I started faxing it every day, sometimes twice. And after about a week, I got a letter from the Chicken Soup people, and they agreed to give me 1 book. I said, "That's fantastic, 1 book, and 3 weeks to do it." So I kept at it, and in the meantime, I had received 125 packets of Chicken Soup in the mail. That's a different speech. But I had $100 I collected from friends, and I set out to get 125 bowls. So I went around to the store trying to buy 125 bowls for $100. Well, finally I was at the Old Time Pottery in Columbus, Ohio, and the manager was like, "What do you need to And I said, 125 bowls for $100. And he said, I'll give you the bowls for $100. And I said, including tax? And he said, including tax, and I'm not going to wrap them. So I took them, I was loading 125 ceramic bowls in my trunk, praying I didn't have to stop on the way home. But anyway, so I had the soup, I had the bowls, all I needed was the spoons. Spoons. So I didn't want somebody to give me 125 spoons, and I didn't want somebody to give me the money for 125 spoons. I wanted to go out and tell our story to 125 people. People always ask what they can do to help. All I needed you to do was open your drawer and give me a spoon in support of our mission. So I did that, and as I told people, people started telling people. And I was getting spoons FedEx from Phoenix, courier from Children's Hospital to OSU, in my cash drawer at the Macy's. And that car I talked about, the window didn't go up. So I find spoons on the seat. I stopped at the traffic light, the spoon came out from under the seat. I thought, my God, the spoons have stolen the story. So I had the books, or I had the spoons, I had the books, or the bowls and the chicken, and the soup. And I had to order the books the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So that Tuesday, April said, what are you going to do about the books? And I said, I don't know. You know, every night I'd come home, I'd walk in the back door, through the kitchen, the dining room, to the living room, open the front door because I knew they were going to show up. Well, I didn't know what to do. The next day at 10 o'clock, I was at the hospital. And the phone rang, I answered it. You know, this is Steve. Steve, this is Jack Canfield from Chicken Soup. Hold please. So I collected myself, I got back on the phone. He said, Steve, we need your address to send you the 125 books you asked for. That's pretty incredible, actually. So I get to the weekend, and I was completely fearful of judgment. So I got up in front of the room, and I told the whole story about the books, and the soup, and the bowls, and the spoons, and it really was absolutely amazing. And at the end of the whole thing, they all stood up and gave me the love and support I needed to propel me to guide and facilitate those weekends for the next 10 years, which is what I started out doing. And through that whole process is how I learned the power of passion, the importance of conviction, the need for faith, and the gift of giving back. And I'm happy to say that in August of 2001, I actually published the book, Seasons of Hope Spring, which was 51 stories of people who are infected or affected by HIV. Thank you.